I assumed birthdays were no longer about candles and parties, but about family choosing to show up. So when my daughter, Claire, informed me that her mother-in-law's birthday mattered more than mine, she expected sadness or guilt. Instead, I smiled. What she didn't know, because I never felt the need to flaunt it, was that I own a private $6 million villa in Tuscany. While she spent her evening flattering her husband's family, I boarded a jet, surrounded by unexpected guests who valued me more than shared blood. When the photos went online, revealing who celebrated with me, her confidence shattered. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's a strategy. And being underestimated is the sweetest advantage. My name is Vivienne Marlowe, and at 67 years old, I never expected to be battling for a place in my own daughter's priorities. I had planned a quiet birthday dinner, nothing extravagant, just a homemade cake, candles, and Claire's presence. But when she called, her tone cold and rehearsed, I sensed something was off. She spoke of scheduling conflicts and obligations, hesitating only long enough to soften the blow she thought would break me. What she didn't understand was that I had spent decades learning to hide disappointment behind grace. The conflict didn't start with her words. It started with her assumption that I had nowhere else to be, no one else to celebrate with, and nothing beyond her approval. Claire arrived the next morning, accompanied by her husband, Daniel. She didn't sit, didn't hug, didn't acknowledge the decorations I had prepared. Instead, she delivered her verdict. We're prioritizing my mother-in-law's birthday, not yours. Daniel avoided eye contact, clearly aware of the sting those words carried. Claire, however, seemed almost proud of her decision, like she was displaying maturity rather than cruelty. She assumed I would plead, cry, or manipulate. Instead, I nodded and smiled. Inside, something shifted, not anger, clarity. For years, I excused her entitlement as youthful pride. But entitlement nurtured becomes disrespect. And disrespect, left unchecked, becomes distance. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply set down the cake plate she had been holding and asked them if they wanted coffee. Her composure unsettled them more than tears ever could. Claire kept glancing at her, expecting a broken reaction. Instead, her mother's silence felt like a mirror, forcing her to see the weight of her own words. While they left, convinced they had established a boundary, she stood in the quiet house and let the calm settle around her. Acceptance didn't mean defeat. It meant she was done trying to earn the affection she already deserved. She walked to her study and opened a drawer rarely touched. Inside lay documents, property deeds, investment portfolios, and photographs of a villa nestled amongst Tuscan hills. For decades, she kept her wealth understated, choosing simplicity to keep relationships genuine. Claire believed her mother had nothing beyond a modest pension and a paid-off home. She never knew about the inheritance left by Vivienne's grandmother, an inheritance transformed through smart investments into unimaginable luxury. She traced a finger over the villa's photograph, not with arrogance but with quiet satisfaction. Ignored doesn't mean unworthy. And underestimation is often power. She called one person, her oldest friend Margaret, who gasped when she heard the news. Minutes later, Margaret was in her living room, laughing at the absurdity of a daughter who had no idea her mother owned a $6 million villa. They reminisced about summers spent in Italy, wine under olive trees, and sunsets reflecting off terracotta roofs. The villa wasn't about bragging, it was about sanctuary. And at that moment she decided her birthday would be spent there. Not to spite Claire, but to remind herself she was more than a forgotten obligation. She moved with purpose, contacting her private caretaker in Tuscany, arranging transport, packing light linen dresses and sun hats. She notified her travel assistant, confirming the villa's staff could prepare for guests. Everything fell into place effortlessly, because she had built a life where luxury was a choice, not a statement. Each packed item symbolized independence. She wasn't running away from hurt, she was running toward self-respect. The thought of raising a glass on Italian soil made her smile, not in triumph but in liberation. At dawn, she left for the airport, alone but not lonely. As the private jet lifted, she looked out at the shrinking city below, a place filled with memories, sacrifices, and expectations. Tuscany awaited, with vineyards stretching like emerald ribbons and a villa bathed in golden sunlight. She didn't anticipate the spectacle her photos would cause. She simply embraced the peace of choosing herself. The world below faded, and with it, the hurt. Ahead lay celebration, not out of spite, but out of rediscovered joy. She stepped out of the car and onto the gravel driveway, breathing in the warm Tuscan air scented with jasmine and rosemary. The villa's stone walls glowed honey gold under the morning sun, its windows framed with ivy. Staff greeted her with heartfelt smiles, remembering her past visits with fondness. As she entered, the marble foyer and vaulted ceilings reminded her of a world she once kept hidden, one nurtured by foresight and discipline. Walking through the courtyard, she paused by the fountain, letting the gentle splash wash away lingering hurt. This wasn't an escape. It was a homecoming to a part of herself she had long neglected, the woman who built a legacy quietly and gracefully. She expected solitude, but instead found a surprise. Several old friends already gathered in the garden, sipping espresso beneath olive trees. Margaret had orchestrated the reunion, inviting former colleagues, neighbors from her Italy visits, and even a retired ambassador she once aided through philanthropic work. They greeted her with warmth and familiarity, not because of wealth, but because of bonds built through kindness and loyalty. Seeing them reminded her she wasn't alone, nor irrelevant. While Claire had chosen her mother-in-law's party, these people chose her without obligation. Their presence affirmed something powerful. Value isn't measured by those who neglect you, but by those who arrive willingly. The celebration unfolded with elegance rather than extravagance. A long table draped in white linen overlooked vineyards rolling into the horizon. Laughter blended with classical guitar as guests shared stories about travel, charity events, and memories of past summers. She raised a glass of Chianti not to flaunt wealth but to honor connection. The staff prepared Tuscan dishes, truffle pasta, fresh figs, and gelato. There were no speeches laced with guilt, no passive-aggressive remarks, no expectations. It was the birthday she wished Claire would have understood: intimacy, appreciation, love. And for the first time in years, she felt truly celebrated. As the evening progressed, guests explored the villa: an infinity pool overlooking vineyards, art collected from Italian painters, and a private library housing first editions. To her, these weren't symbols of superiority. They were chapters of a life built through deliberate choices. She had kept these luxuries quiet because she wanted relationships driven by love, not status. But tonight, she realized her humility had come at a cost. Her daughter mistook simplicity for lack. If Claire had paid attention, she might have seen hints: fine china inherited, Italian wool coats, or fluency in the language. The villa didn't brag, it whispered independence. Guests insisted on photos as the sunset painted the hills in amber and rose. She didn't pose for vanity, she captured moments to remember peace reclaimed. The pictures weren't curated for spectacle. They showed genuine laughter, warm embraces, and a woman glowing with confidence rather than trying to prove anything. Margaret posted a few images online, tagging the villa's discreet business page and mentioning a celebration among friends. There was no bragging caption, just authenticity. Yet even that was enough to ignite curiosity thousands of miles away. Among the guests was someone Claire would never expect: a philanthropist whose foundation supported global education, a best-selling author, and an art curator respected worldwide. Their presence wasn't accidental. She had built connections quietly through decades of volunteer work and investments. These friendships weren't for status, they were for purpose. When photos surfaced, people noticed not the villa, but the company she kept. Suddenly, the woman Claire dismissed as ordinary appeared extraordinary, because humility had masked influence. And the contrast between perception and reality was stark. Claire scrolled through her feed between speeches at her mother-in-law's celebration and froze. The Tuscan villa. The infinity pool, the influential guests, the laughter. Recognition washed over her: shock, confusion, then humiliation. She realized she had never bothered to know her own mother beyond obligation. Her confidence crumbled as friends whispered, comparing the two birthdays. The mother she thought had nothing special had lived a life richer in love, travel, and accomplishment than she imagined. And for the first time, Claire understood: neglecting someone doesn't diminish them, it diminishes you. Claire excused herself from her mother-in-law's table and rushed to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Her hands shook as she scrolled through more photos: her mother in designer evening wear, laughing with influential figures she recognized from magazines. She tried to steady her breathing, but humiliation clung to her like a second skin. The realization stung: she had judged her mother based on assumptions, not knowledge. She imagined the whispers already circulating, friends comparing celebrations, questioning her choices. Tears blurred her vision, not just from embarrassment but regret. She had chosen obligation over love, and now, in that bathroom mirror, she confronted a truth she had ignored for years. She didn't know her mother at all. Returning to the table, she attempted a smile, but jealousy gnawed beneath the surface. Her mother-in-law, wearing modest attire, surrounded by neighbors, seemed suddenly small in comparison to the villa's grandeur. Claire realized she spent years proving loyalty to people who never viewed her as family the way her mother did. The bitterness wasn't toward wealth, it was toward the revelation that she'd replaced sincerity with status. Her in-laws noticed her distraction and asked if she was all right. She lied. But inside, resentment brewed, not toward her mother's success but toward herself for overlooking it. Envy mixed with shame formed a storm she could no longer ignore. By the time dessert was served, murmurs swept across the room. A distant cousin showed the photos to her mother-in-law, who raised an eyebrow, not in admiration but surprise. Daniel leaned over, curiosity turning into shock as he recognized locations and figures. His father remarked bluntly, "Your mother seems more connected than we assumed." The respect in his tone caught Claire off guard. The family she had tried so hard to impress now spoke of her mother with respect, something Claire rarely offered. For the first time, she felt the inversion of power. The mother she sidelined became the woman everyone wanted to know. Alone later that night, she began piecing together memories, the sacrifices she had dismissed as parental duty. Her mother works double shifts to fund her education. The vacations she declined so Claire could attend private school. The job promotions she turned down to stay present during Claire's childhood. The villa now represented not privilege, but sacrifices transformed into independence. Claire realized she had mistaken humility for insignificance. Her mother didn't flaunt wealth because she believed love shouldn't require display. That revelation shattered her entitlement. She finally understood the weight of her choices and the depth of her mother's restraint. The contrast between the two celebrations haunted her. At her mother-in-law's party, guests attended out of obligation or routine. In Tuscany, people celebrated from genuine affection. Claire began recognizing the uncomfortable truth. She had pursued validation from people who wouldn't sacrifice for her, while neglecting the one person who always did. Loyalty isn't measured by calendars, it's measured by presence. And she had chosen to be absent. The comparison wasn't about luxury versus simplicity. It was about love versus convenience. And convenience had cost her more than she realized. Within hours, the photos went viral among family and acquaintances. Messages poured in, some praising her mother's elegance, others questioning Claire's decision. Questions she couldn't answer. How could she explain choosing obligation over love? How could she justify ignorance of her mother's accomplishments? The narrative shifted. People admired her mother's grace and independence. Claire, meanwhile, faced scrutiny. Sympathy faded into judgment, not for her oversight but for her arrogance. Public perception didn't shame her mother. It humbled Claire. That night, Claire stared at her phone, scrolling through images again, not as a spectator, but as a witness to her own blindness. She didn't blame her mother for celebrating. She blamed herself for assuming she wouldn't and couldn't. The villa symbolized more than wealth. It symbolized a life built while she wasn't looking. She finally confronted the harsh truth. She had allowed in-laws to dictate her priorities, abandoning the woman who raised her. The realization didn't lead to anger, it led to remorse. For the first time, she understood who truly deserved her loyalty. Claire arrived at the villa unannounced, exhaustion and guilt etched into her features. She expected anger, maybe gloating. Instead, her mother greeted her with calm neutrality, neither warmth nor hostility. They sat on the terrace overlooking the vineyards, silence thick between them. Claire began defensively, explaining schedules and obligations, but her mother didn't interrupt. When she finally spoke, it wasn't loud. It was steady. She asked one simple question. "If I mattered to you, would you have asked me how I wanted to spend my birthday?" The question stripped away excuses. Claire's rehearsed explanations faltered. The confrontation wasn't about Tuscany or luxury. It was about respect, presence, and priorities. Claire's voice trembled as she offered a half apology wrapped in justification. She claimed she was trying to keep peace with her in-laws, that she didn't think it mattered, and that her mother never seemed to care about big celebrations. But each justification only exposed her ignorance. Her mother listened, then calmly pointed out how she'd mistaken silence for indifference. Years of understated affection had been interpreted as lack of need. Claire's apology shifted, becoming less defensive and more genuine as she confronted the reality that she didn't truly see her mother as a person with feelings, desires, or dignity. The realization stung more than any reprimand could. She didn't lash out or demand repentance. She set boundaries, clear, firm, and long overdue. She explained that respect cannot be conditional, nor affection transactional. She made it clear she would no longer prioritize relationships built on convenience or obligation. Claire was welcome in her life, but not at the cost of being taken for granted. The Tuscany villa wasn't a weapon. It was a reminder she had built a life capable of joy without begging for inclusion. If Claire wanted a relationship, it must be on mutual respect, not entitlement. Boundaries didn't punish, they protected. News of the confrontation rippled through the family. Some criticized Claire, others defended her, but the division illuminated long-standing patterns. Claire's tendency to appease in-laws and her mother's habit of forgiving too easily. The extended family argued over loyalty, judgment, and priorities. Her mother didn't participate. She let the storm pass, knowing that opinions rooted in gossip, not truth, held little weight. The division was painful, but it served a purpose, revealing who valued authenticity over appearances. Relationships shifted, not by force but by clarity. Back home, Claire replayed the conversation repeatedly. What hurt wasn't the villa or the influential guests. It was the realization that her mother didn't need her presence to feel valued. Regret deepened, not for embarrassment, but for the years she overlooked birthdays, milestones, and simple phone calls. She recognized how easily she handed over emotional authority to her husband's family. The guilt wasn't surface level, it was transformative. She wanted to rebuild, but she understood it couldn't be rushed. Trust lost through neglect isn't restored through a single apology. It requires patience and changed behavior. Claire began examining her choices. She noticed how quickly she accommodated her in-laws' wishes, how often she dismissed her own mother's needs, and how rarely she questioned why. She saw how cultural expectations and marriage dynamics shaped her priorities. For the first time, she questioned loyalty, not as obedience, but as fairness. Respect wasn't merely about gestures. It was an acknowledgement. She finally understood that love is not proven by sacrifice alone, it is proven by who you choose to stand beside when no one is watching. That realization marked the beginning of maturity, not just remorse. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because the ending ahead isn't about luxury or pride, it's about the choice that defines their future. While Claire wrestled with regret, her mother thrived, not to spite her daughter but to embrace long-suppressed independence. She extended her stay in Tuscany, attended art auctions, partnered with local charities, and explored vineyards she once postponed for motherhood. She wasn't withdrawing from family, she was reclaiming identity beyond motherhood. For decades, she defined herself through sacrifice. Now she defined herself through choice. She still loved her daughter. But she no longer anchored her happiness to someone else's validation. She took control, not of others, but of her own narrative. Claire spent the following weeks reassessing her life, not just her relationship with her mother, but her marriage, obligations, and sense of self. She began declining unnecessary social events, prioritizing time with people who genuinely cared. She realized she had been performing motherhood and daughterhood for approval rather than connection. In therapy, she confronted uncomfortable truths: insecurity, people-pleasing, and resentment she never voiced. She started initiating small gestures, morning texts, shared photos, thoughtful invitations, not to buy forgiveness, but to rebuild trust steadily. She understood now that love isn't proven through grand gestures, it's proven through presence. Regret had matured into intention. For the first time, she prioritized authenticity over image. One unexpected ally emerged: her mother-in-law. After seeing the Tuscany photos and witnessing Claire's distress, she gently acknowledged that perhaps she, and the family, had taken Claire's efforts for granted. She admitted she often expected Claire to juggle everyone's expectations without considering her own feelings. In a rare moment of honesty, she encouraged Claire to reconnect with her mother and reassured her that prioritizing her birth parent didn't diminish loyalty to her husband's family. The conversation created a shift. Claire realized the pressure to choose sides had been partially imagined, partially imposed. The support offered her permission to redefine boundaries without guilt. When Claire visited Tuscany again, she didn't arrive seeking forgiveness alone. She arrived seeking understanding. Her mother listened, not through the lens of superiority, but through experience. She accepted the apology, but clarified that reconciliation wasn't a reset button. It required change, shared time, mutual respect, and honesty, not obligation. She explained she didn't need lavish gestures, she needed presence and consideration. Claire agreed, acknowledging that rebuilding would be slow and deliberate. Their reconciliation wasn't romanticized, it was mature. They hugged not to erase the past, but to move forward with awareness. Conditions weren't ultimatums, they were respect personified. Inspired by newfound clarity, she revisited her legacy, not to punish or reward, but to protect. She established trusts for grandchildren, funded scholarships for underprivileged students, and partnered with Tuscan charities focused on art and agriculture. She ensured her villa would remain a sanctuary, not a bargaining chip for family disputes. Her wealth became an instrument of empowerment rather than leverage. Claire observed these decisions with humility, realizing inheritance wasn't guaranteed, it was earned through relationship, not entitlement. In shaping her legacy, she demonstrated wisdom. Family mattered, but dignity mattered more. She returned to her villa with a renewed sense of self. She hosted community art nights, studied Italian literature, and rekindled friendships she once paused for motherhood. Her independence wasn't rebellion, it was rediscovery. She still loved her daughter, but she no longer defined herself solely through motherhood. Tuscany didn't escape, it was evolution. She treated aging not as decline, but as freedom from compromise. The world saw a wealthy woman, but beneath that label was something richer, a woman who learned to celebrate herself without permission. Over time, Claire honored her commitment. Sometimes they spent birthdays together, sometimes they celebrated separately without resentment. Relationship didn't revert to what it was, it evolved. Respect replaced entitlement, understanding replaced assumptions, and where distance was needed, they allowed it without guilt. They didn't pretend to be perfect, they chose honesty. The world often portrays reconciliation as fairy tale harmony. Theirs was realistic, messy, gentle, gradual. Some wounds faded, some left wisdom instead of bitterness. On her next birthday, she stood on the villa's balcony as the sun set over rolling vineyards. Messages came, some from Tuscany friends, some from Claire. She smiled, not because she won, but because she grew. She realized closure wasn't humiliating someone or flaunting wealth. It was recognizing her worth without requiring validation. She didn't sever ties to teach lessons. She set boundaries to protect her peace. Her story didn't end with revenge, it ended with dignity. She celebrated, not in loneliness, but in sovereignty. Tuscany was no longer a secret. It was a symbol of independence earned, respect demanded, and love reclaimed on her terms.